So now we're going to talk about the other side. What do you least hopeful about? Or what issues really do you think are so problematic that could become barriers that are not surmountable in the near term? A nicer way is, if you have polite advice for entrepreneurs in the field who could be dedicating their life to something, is there an area that you are a bit more skeptical about right now? I'll start. I'll give you guys some time. So I would love to ask Justin the question about signal to noise on generalized passive data collection, which I think is incredibly exciting as a concept, but incredibly difficult to actually operationalize in a statistical model, where you actually can give someone clarity to take a clinically meaningful action. I think it's very, very hard to try and get to the type of precision that we look for in the medical community as it relates to prescribing a product. Take your med now. Make sure you don't double take your med or triple take your med by accident because we have a false positive. There's just really small room for error in these clinically meaningful applications. And I wonder what scale we need to get at for those applications to be clinically meaningful versus nice to have, perhaps modest incremental benefit to a patient. So I will put that cynical view out there for Justin to tell me I'm really wrong, hopefully.
Well, so I think part of this is just, we think about how do we use passive data, let's say data from a phone, data from a wearable to guide some kind of clinical decision making, right? There's a lot of ways you could imagine doing that. The example that I like to use though is like, if I know the GPS, the locations that my patient has, somebody with schizophrenia, and I just want to know, like, do they have a job? Are they showing up to something? Are they sleeping at their house at night? Are they things like that? I can know those things with some certainty from their phone and be able to work with them around, to their community function and kind of being able to see things like that over time. Something as simple as just, are they sleeping, going over their sleep data with them. Sometimes I've found that that's a really helpful way to kind of, in a stigma neutral way, like just show them the data and be like, oh, you just said you were doing great, but actually this says you haven't slept in days. And then they can kind of open up and be like, yeah, it's true, actually, I haven't slept. I wasn't going to tell you because I think it changes the conversation. And I do think exactly how you operationalize this at scale and provide companies, I think that does need to be a more nuanced conversation, because I think a lot of our assumptions about what should just work are often very specific to certain kinds of patients, but then also things that people assume won't work. People are too paranoid to collect data on their phones, things like that, just turn out to also be myths worth sort of exploring, because I think what we're finding is that our intuitions are just often not great intuitions.
Great examples.
Facebook. The loss of privacy and the expectation that your data is your data. So the first person who gets an ad from mattress discounters, right? Not that you would give the information away, but some creative person could get the information and say, sleep problems, I'm going to send you to mattress discounters, right? So the key linchpin is the loss of the expectation of privacy. And so, Robert's talking about an integrated record, which we need, and an integrated system, which we need. People get very upset when the mental health information is accessible to other parties. So you couple that with the total breach of trust around technology, which has happened through our friends at Facebook. I do think there's a meaningful problem here that you have to solve for. I don't know the answer to this question. Blue Cross is Anthem had 80 million people's data hacked, right? Experian, who you didn't even know existed, gave away all your social security information and all your credit card numbers. Thank you for that, right? So this is a broad-based problem. This is not about anything you're doing or you're doing or you're, but somehow we haven't figured this whole electronic thing. So now you take a condition with more shame, more vulnerability, more prejudice, stigma, a history of discrimination for which we needed mental health parity laws to correct some of the injustices of the past. And then you say, share us your data. Well, I'd be interested in learning from Justin what people say and how they respond to that. I'd like to learn more about that. But the threat of the loss of privacy is like a cloud that travels over technology and this space. Then you have 42 CFR, in the substance use disorder world where you can't share any information about anybody. Like, so that's a whole different problem, right? So there's double protections around substance use disorders.
Well, I think the undercurrent of what you're saying, probably the biggest concern, is that there is this false sense of anonymity. And so if you talk about how we were having a discussion beforehand, to prep for this, trying to figure out what are the barriers to access, and you say, well, anonymity may be one, but the anonymity may be an illusion. And so, you know, this is sort of where one of the things you say, what scares me, what am I discouraged about, is I feel like behavioral health is a human problem, not a machine problem. And so there are a lot of these early models that are very tech heavy. And I understand the place that technology has to be leveraged to create more scalable models to help fix the supply and demand imbalance. But I'm afraid that they'll take the human element out of it too much. And okay, so we can throw some dose of AI and ML and whatever else you want to throw in there, because everybody needs a couple buzzwords in there. But the reality is, you know, and you can create the fake story that'll talk to me like they get me. But I'm still really concerned that you take the human element out of it too much, and then either A, something gets missed, meaning that your models are only as good as the data you fed into it, and so somebody ends up actually getting really hurt because it's been too automated, or B, you don't have the level of effectiveness and the level of care that you need to get the outcomes you need. So we talk a lot in our shop, not just around behavioral health, but in general about this tech touch balance, where we try and figure out how to optimize that. And it varies depending upon so many things. It varies by disease state. It varies by patient cohort. Are you elderly? Are you young? Are you frail? Are you comorbid? It varies by education, socioeconomic state. Somebody who's worried about putting food and shelter, putting food in their stomachs and shelter over their head tonight, has a whole different set of expectations and concerns than they may have. Behavioral health may be further down the pike for them in terms of the list of worries. And so, it's really easy to bucket everybody who has an anxiety disorder into this one bucket and say, oh, great, we got this online anxiety behavioral tool and it's going to fix everybody. And then you figure out that like 100 people will all look 100 times different. And so this one, we really believe we're in like version 1.0 at best of behavioral health tools, and there's been a lot of money and a lot of hype around this, and we're going to learn, but we're going to make a bunch of mistakes along the way, and that's what scares me, is because like when you screw up a widget and there's a bug in your computer processor from Intel and it screws up some calculations in Excel, and maybe I'm dating myself, if you guys all remember, years ago there was a problem with the processor and screwed up all the calculations. Like, lives aren't at stake. But when we think about what we do, lives are at stake. And so people fall off the wagon. People have relapses around opioids and they end up taking fentanyl and die in 10 seconds. I mean, there are real-term consequences to this. So that's my concern about, like, it's like you throw George Orwell and Big Brother on top of this all, and it's just not that simple.
Yeah, just to follow up, I think that also is one of my concerns, is that by trying to take a simple solution to a really complex problem, that we will not solve the problem, but we won't learn anything, because
it might make it worse.
It might make it worse. In fact, if you give everybody who has mouth-to-mouth depression an online, treatment, and you don't give them the in-person treatment, and it works great for 90% of those people, for those 10% of those people who do horribly, there will be a backlash eventually where people realize that this is just not something everyone wants to subscribe to.
Part of it might end up being a risk stratification problem too in the early days. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look at simple things, it's like outplacement, knee replacements, right? They're doing at various places around the country, they do same-day knee joint replacements, right? Well, they're not doing it on somebody who's 85 and has got a bad heart, right? They're doing it on somebody who's 40, who's an athlete, probably destroyed their knee over time, and that's the person who can recover from it. It might be the same thing with behavioral health, where you sort of have to really risk stratify your patients and be careful about what you're doing with technology for those that are more complex.
Anything at the end of the table?
Well,
you don't have to if you don't.
No, I mean, a lot of what I'm hearing from everybody is that these diseases that we use one word to describe are in fact not a single disease. They're a heterogeneous collection of different diseases. And I think the same challenges that we're talking about with how you develop digital health solutions to them applies to pharmacotherapeutics as well. And I think that's why the progress in that area has been so difficult. When you have one of the ways that biologists approach really hard problems is using genetics. It's sort of this way to shine a light on a complicated issue by finding the genes that underlie it, and then hopefully you learn about the mechanisms. And I think for psychiatric diseases in general, and certainly for mood disorders in particular, because they're so heterogeneous, finding genes that have a significant impact in a large population has been really tough. And I think, so that's one of my concerns, because I'm a big fan of genetics, and it's been very helpful in other diseases in terms of helping us move forward, finding new targets, finding new approaches. There's been some progress in genome-wide association studies for depression, but it's been slow. And there have been a limited number of replicable genes that have been identified. And so I think without that tool, we'll even be more challenged. We certainly have other tools. We have imaging tools and different ways we can approach it, but genetics would be a really powerful tool, but will require very, very large numbers of patients and ways of stratifying patients which really don't have a common disease at all, but have 10 or 50 or 100 different types of diseases.